There has been one man who has called this bull market as accurate as you can call it over the last 2 years. He is a friend of the channel. Tesla, Palantir, Nvidia, Apple. He has been on the cutting edge of analyzing these companies. He has traveled across the world to make sure his analysis is the right analysis for investors to listen to. Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend, the most stylish man on Wall Street, Mr. Dan Ives. Dan, what's up?
No, it's great to be here. Great and style. Speaking of that, stylish. Look at that shirt.
We had to bust it out for you, Dan. We got to welcome you to the show. We got 3,500 people here. Had to make sure you have a warm welcome, and I just wanted you to make you feel at home with.
No, it's seriously, it's great. I'm so glad this worked out. It's a great kicking off going into holidays, post the Fed sell-off. I mean, it was good because a lot of the bears I haven't heard from in 6 months. I was getting worried about the health and concern. So it's good. It was good to hear from them. Last night.
All right. Well, I got a lot of questions I want to ask you, Dan. We're going to talk about your 2025 outlook, but I want to start with this. I think it's very important in life to take a moment and step back and to give people their flowers. You, since the beginning of 2023, decided that this was going to be a tech bull market. And with all the ups and downs, the one thing or the one analyst that I can point to that has been consistent on a thesis, meaning you're trustworthy. People know that you have a thesis, you believe in it, whether the stocks go up or down, you actually care about the argument you're making, is your thesis on the technology and AI revolution that we're in right now. You are one of the most respected analysts on Wall Street. Tesla, Palantir, Nvidia, and a lot of other names you have called incredibly correct. My question to you is, how do you feel as an analyst on Wall Street? And do you feel like your brand has finally gotten the respect that you've worked 30 years to build?
Yeah, no, and thanks for that intro. Look, I feel like I'm not someone that look, as I always say, haters hate, right? So I never worry about in terms of just broader. You're always gonna have the critics and stuff like that. My biggest thing that's been very rewarding is traveling around the globe, whether it's institutional, whether it's in a random hotel, a waiter in Warsaw or someplace in throughout Asia where someone comes up to you in a hotel and they're like, hey, I didn't listen to my advisor or the haters or the negative, the black swan event. I listened to you, and because of you, X, Y, and Z have happened. You've changed my life. So I found it more rewarding because a lot of my career, the only people that benefited were institutions, right? Whether it was Apple in the early days, to have Microsoft, Amazon, and now, especially the last few years, sort of post COVID, being on Twitter, or whatever, X, just being more out there. I feel like I've been able to take a lot of that and more toward especially a lot of the retail community. So it's been actually very rewarding from that perspective.
Well, I think it has to be rewarding because a lot of retail investors listen to you over, their financial advisors. And when you say, hey, at Nvidia on August 5th, $90 is a steal, and then Nvidia goes to 140, I mean, I would imagine people have a lot of affinity for you, respect for you, and that has to feel good because that's your job.
But it's also sticking with the theme. And also it's look, man, 3.5 million whatever miles travel my career, we around the globe we see it. So that's the other thing, is that a lot of the bears, just because you're wearing a fleece, no sleeves, in the 10th floor in New York City office building doesn't make you smart, right? So the point is the AI, they can't see in the spreadsheet. You can't see it in your townhouse in Marin. You can see it on Metro North. So the point is that by seeing around the globe, you have a different perspective. And we talked to hundreds of IT managers, sales partners. So that's why a lot of times, when we've gone through so much of this volatility, I just view it as more stick to. It's don't, because it's that confidence. But look, man, that's how me and you have talked about coming out of iPhone launch 2007. Remember, then the haters oh, BlackBerry, this is a joke. They're gonna take it. Microsoft, Nadella takes over, going to change the world. The view of Musk going back to 2009, 2010. So that it all sort of led on my whole career led up to like just being more and more confident
Right.
and not getting skewed by event, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with a lot of analysts is like stock goes up, stock goes down, they react to it because they think they need to. But the definition of a long-term investor is having a theme investing. You could be wrong, everyone's wrong, but if you're right, you hold on to that because the worst thing to do a lot of times in the market is to sell your winners.
Well, also many analysts too, right? Like in other words, like if you look at the historically, the problem is that many, whether it's a hubris thing, like I know it, they don't listen a lot of times to opposite sides. They stay very with the sort of herd. It's easier to stay with the herd instead of going aggressive and being, just different calls. Because sometimes in those different calls, like they go against you. And
Right.
guess what? Like when they go against you, like, you have to stick with it. Like, so the point is like there's been many times in my career, it's like when you're going through, I mean, even if you go back to like Palantir, right? Like, okay, it's work and work. Remember they had the quarter, like guidance was a little stock goes to like 21 bucks. Dude,
Yep.
you're wrong. Does that emails come in left and right, haters left and right. So the point is like in those situations, you're like tune it out, opportunity, move forward.
Okay, last question on that, and then I want to start with Palantir. How do you deal with the haters, and how do you have a thick skin?
Actually, first of all, I like haters because it gives you perspective. You got to understand the bear and the hate. So I think part of the problem is that if you don't listen to the haters, you need to understand the other side of the trade. That's
Right.
very that's actually been a big part of my career, like understanding. There's a lot of times I do like bull bear arguments, like in with institutions, a restaurant with a bear and then accounts just sit there and wait. I like that. And from a thick skin perspective, I never take anything personally,
Right.
even though a lot of times it is like personal. I just kind of view it as like people are frustrated, right? They're sitting in the basement. Mom's like, "Oh, dude, meatloaf's ready. I'll bring it down." And the point is like, and I get it, and like they're negative on tech, waiting for the Black Swan event. The Bulls are watching college football Saturday. The Bears are focused on the Sri Lankan currency spread blowing out. And I mean, like, bottom line is, like I told you, like, Bears come out on the weekends because the Bulls are just what? Bears are always wearing Black Swan event. Oh, Fed, geopolitical. Oh, this is the thing. And I've heard for 20 years, right? That's how they missed every
Right.
transformational tech name the last 2 decades.
Right. That is correct. So let's get into one of the transformational tech names that you called accurately in 2023 around July. I think you initiated coverage. This was a big deal for my community. For me, we've been covering the stock since $6. 2022 wrote it down from 30 to 6.
Yeah.
And to have someone with your brand finally kind of give it a little bit more exposure on Wall Street, that was exciting for us. So I want you to take me back to 2023. What about Palantir got you excited, and how did you decide this was going to be a
Yeah,
transformation name?
that started like spring of 23, early, like by late 22, early 23, like more and more tech players talking to me throughout the channel, whether it's big tech partners. They're like, look, what Palantir is doing in the enterprise, like it's real, like this technology.
Hmm.
And as I started doing more of the work, I'm like, it basically the bell went off, and I'm like, look, this is government has been their play, but the future is enterprise. And I think it was understanding what AIP could be and my view of the AI revolution in terms of like, okay, it was going to start off with Godfather of AI, Jensen, Nvidia, but as you trajectory it out, second, third derivative, Palantir, if unless something dramatic happened, they were so well positioned. And I looked at the stock, and I'm like, look, this this is one like remember I own no stock, right? So it was one
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I just view it as kind of like from an investor perspective, my job is to find names that are dislocated. And I'm like, this one is like in a career, maybe on two hands. It was a table pounder. And then also understanding like every institutional negative, sell side analyst negative, conspiracy theories, whatever. And it was almost one like I'm like, oh my God, this could be the one where they, as I always say, like they despise it as a teenager at 12. and then they absolutely pulling their hair out, hate it, despise it when it's a senior citizen, 75, living in Boca Raton. So I love those names, right? Haters, they hated at 13, despise at 75. So it's just, and also it's confidence, like in the management team, in Carp, Glazer, down, like it's a company that I think you have done so much awesome work on the retail community. As I've always said, just like Tesla, they were way ahead of the institutional community in terms of understanding this. When you understand the culture of Palantir, dude, we're talking like elite of elite. And I think that's the other thing. Like people didn't really understand culture from top down to engineers to software developers to like how much they care about Palantir to the merch and everything else. It's just I think a lot of people don't understand culture.
Well, so let me ask you this question. I don't know if you've been asked this before, but I think this will be interesting. Why, in your opinion, as an institutional analyst, was retail able to get Palantir before your compadres were able to get Palantir?
Because institutional, sometimes they're like, I'm smarter than them. This is evaluate. It's a group think. They're not part of the cool kid club. What I'm saying is in terms of like they have names like Snowflake and MongoDB. There's like institutional. Palantir is not someone that like would always at institutional conferences, meeting with investors. They're kind of like an anti. So it was very easy to almost be just like negative on them is like from a consensus perspective.
Right.
I think and that comes into the group think. And me and you've talked about it before. I think that's how like whether it's Tesla, Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple, haters, stocks going to 50 now, it's going to 4 trillion market cap. It's like it's very easy if you just get caught up in the consensus institutional, you end up like you just miss these historic moves and then they stay stubborn. No, I'm doubling down on my hate. No, dude, Brady out of Michigan, he was now they won 2 Super Bowls. No, I don't think it's work. And then you're like, you always have that friend who's like at the sports bar, like you're just getting like hanging out. They'll say like the provocative statements, like, I don't think Jordan was the best basketball player. Dude, I don't think thing about that is the equivalent from a stock perspective. And that's why like guys like that, you're like, okay, you're deleted out of the text group, not invited to the next thing. Just the nature of it.
You got the green bubbles. We need
Exactly. Look, green bubble. You always have to beware, right? Like when they have the green bubbles in text.
Last question on Palantir, then we'll get to Tesla. Use cases. That has been kind of your core thesis. Is that something that you also felt the analysts don't understand how many use cases?
Totally, because they're not doing the work at boot camps, talking to customers, seeing it, looking at the demos, understand it. And I think to me, it was the use cases, not understanding. And then also, as I always say, the bears can find AI in the spreadsheets when they're sitting in the caves, right?
Yeah.
So the point is that that's how they've missed every transformational tech name from Meta to Amazon and Tesla. Because you have to be someone that understands, okay, let's go 3, 4, 5 years out. Could they get to 5 billion of free cash flow?
Right.
What could AIP get to from a revenue perspective? What's some of the parts? Let's put a valuation on AIP and then set a valuation for everything else. That's the thing. Like if you go back, like, and I'll just give Apple as an example, be like, no way this ever gets to 300 billion market cap. Our whole thesis going back 2014, it was like services is the valuation. You build it, then you monetize. That's going to start trading internet multiple. No way, no way. Then you just fight the trend. Next thing you know, as an investor, you're trying to figure out times, Ariel, what font to put on the resume. So the point is that it's the same concept here. You have to be a technologist, a visionary, and understand where these names could go and not sitting there, just trying to focus purely on valuation.
Yeah, and I think there's different paradigms for analyzing companies. Some are numbers and valuations, some are the actual thesis, the moat, the visionaries, the leaders. But like a combination of two are important. And sometimes when you have none of the latter and only the spreadsheet, you end up missing a lot.
But I could give you examples like Salesforce.com in the early days. People not understand Benioff was a visionary. They'd focus on EV to revs. EV to revs, EV to revs. Guess what happens? Free cash flow starts, EPS starts. What happened? Now all of a sudden you're looking at free cash flow multiples, EBITDA multiples. Now the whole valuation changes. So the point is, like, I'm just not a believer that you can just sit there. Valuation is very important. Okay, eventually companies have to execute to get to that point. But you can't just sit here on transformational tech names and look out over the 1 year. The point is, like, if a team gets Travis Hunter, number two, are they like, oh, it's just the first year? No, you're focused on coming year. Like, are you getting Juan Soto if you're the Mets just for 1 year? No, it's like, what's this going to look like over the next 5, 7, 8 year? But you have to look at stocks the same way.
Right. Last quick question on Palantir, then we'll move on. Do you think they have real competition?
Mm-mm.
Do you
I,
think?
I mean, now look, down the road, 2, 3 years from now, hyperscalers, especially with Con out the FTC, they're gonna try to do from an M&A perspective, like they recognize as a whole.
Right.
The whole is also why like Microsoft, Oracle, I think others down there are going to more and more partner. So there through M&A, there will be others that would try to go after them. Remember, don't really have a direct sales force. So like others are going to go after the market, but it's the same view of Nvidia. Next 2, 3 years, there is no competition.
Right.
No, see, that's the thing. Like everyone be like, on the stock's telling you something. Like, dude, I go to Asia 5 times a year. Demand supply is 15 to 1. Like, stock could do what it does, but the point is like they own the market, and that's 2 trillion AI capex. That's not changing. But that's a good example. Like when you look like in Nvidia, it's like, oh, stock's telling you something. I'm like, dude, stock can tell you something. That's fine. I'm just telling you like what I see from fabs and demand, and there's one red phone. It's Jensen.
Yeah, that is very fair. Let's get into Tesla. So speaking of visionaries, you believe Tesla can reach 2 trillion in market cap by the end of
And
2025. You
that's
were
probably
one of
conservative. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably conservative. You were, again, one of the only analysts that through all Elon's ups and downs, through buying Twitter, through getting political, through the judge getting rid of his compensation, you were like, this is an AI autonomous FSD story that's not going anywhere. Why do you think 2 trillion is conservative for Tesla?
Because it's my view that autonomous is probably one of the biggest use cases for AI. And where everything's heading, I think over the next 4 or 5 years, autonomous becomes real. And when you think about where that means, like cyber cabs, like I think you're gonna have a few 100,000 per year out there. You look at Uber and Lyft's market and basically take 20, 30% of it, what ultimately could be incremental for Tesla. And then it's the view of FSD penetration. Like FSD penetration, you start to get to true level four. Like, does it go to 50, 60%? That's pure software. What does it do now? Just talk about numbers. Do numbers double? Like in terms from an EPS perspective over the next 2, 3, 4 years? So that's why, like, the only thing that was stopping this was 202 Beltway. Trump got in. We talked about it right when it happened.
Yep.
Trump getting in, bet for the ages. It's a sweep the leg moment, Karate Kid fans, on some of the regulatory perspective. And now with NITS and everything else, it opens up the opportunity on autonomous.
When you say it's a bet for the ages, I mean, we've seen leaders of history in capitalism, entrepreneurship that need to do some level of lobbying to get their agenda passed, especially if they have a greater goal. How do you interpret the Musk and Trump relationship? Do you kind of think it's weird? Do you think it's what he needs to do? How do you think
Look,
it's going to get done?
Rockefeller, JP Morgan, Musk. I mean, I'm just trying to explain. We're talking like a modern day, we're talking about modern day, like call modern day Albert Einstein. If you're a lover, hater, whatever, you cannot deny, like, this is a situation where they both need each other. Trump needs
Right.
Musk, Musk needs Trump.
Correct.
And when I talk about bet for the ages, the biggest thing that was gonna derail the story, and you even see some stuff like Delaware, the political spectacle, head scratcher, Twilight Zone that's happened there with the Musk pet. Politically, Musk, bullseye on its back, Biden administration iced out. Look what happened. That Trump comes in. It's like it's going to change everything. EV tax credits getting pulled. Infrastructure is going to be much more AI driven, and we're already going to start to see that even with Masa and SoftBank where it's going. Autonomous. There's no federal autonomous roadmap in the U.S. Like the point is that they are going to have a federal regulatory roadmap they're going to build for autonomous. And I believe as we go forward, there's going to be a lot of things where, like, you know, you're going to go out 5 years from now and you're going to talk to someone and be like, it's crazy where things are today.
Yeah.
Could you have seen it 5 years ago? No. And I think autonomous is an example of where this is going. And it's my other view. Like, look, come out of Robotaxi today. It's a good example. I'm there. A lot of people maybe on the broadcast are there. Institutionally, next day, disaster, lack of details, disappointment. Right away, I came out. I'm like, dude, this is top 3 day I've ever been to in 25 years. Thousands of events.
Right.
Because it comes down to like a lot of institutional in the spreadsheet, wearing the fleece, no sleeve. They can't see it. They don't, it's not in front of them. It's not spoon fed to them. You see where it goes, and and that's my view of like where Tesla is heading. Deliveries is 10% of the story now.
It's very similar to me. I've never driven a Tesla. I just recently got one in November.
I remember when you bought, and I remember like when you got it, right? You're like, dude, I remember you put the thing out. You're like, I get it.
I get it.
I remember you're like, you got it, and you're like, yeah.
And then I tried FSD, and I'm like, and I had my dad, my 60-year-old dad, who was in there, and you would think he would be scared, and he was just like, let's do it. We were in a 20-minute ride. He was like, let's go for another 20 minutes, because it's so transformational to see this robot on wheels drive you around. And as you said, most people like myself haven't experienced it. When they do, they're probably going to upgrade to FSD, and that's like 95% margins on a car company.
But the whole point is like, if I go back, like many like bears, conspiracy, black swaners, the thing is, if they grew up in the time of like horse and buggy, when the Model T comes, they would probably be sitting there drinking tea or whatever, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's crazy! This Model T, this car." All of a sudden, like computers come, like, "Oh, that's a joke. Typewriters, that's where it's gonna continue." It's the same thing because it comes down like many people and a lot of investors, they're not visionary. They can't see where everything is heading, and they're always looking for what could go wrong, this and that. But again, that's the alpha, man. It's like I always say, like that is how you make money. It's what makes a market. You have sellers, you have buyers.
Right. Last question on Tesla. I think you conceptualize Optimus as a call option on the stock.
0 for 2 trillion right now. But that's one like that could be. I mean, we could be sitting here a few years from now being like, Optimus could be like a huge part of the story in terms of like my view of robotics.
Right. Okay, let's get into another name that you have made a lot of people a lot of money on, quite frankly, which is a company you also think will hit 4 trillion next year, Nvidia. The big question is it's cyclical and eventually it'll pop. What is your response to that?
I think that is a historical view, not recognizing that we're in a fourth industrial revolution and there's only one company in the world that has those chips. Like, so when it comes down to it, I could argue for a stock that could trade at 30 times earnings, if you start to get to a point where they're doing $5.50, $6 earnings, 180 to 200, when you start to look at out year, no, is not, that's not egregious. And for someone like myself that covered .com bubble, 90s, covered it, you're talking about the average company was trading at 30 times revenues, 100 times earnings. So every time someone compares, like, oh, Cisco 99, go to your Christmas dinner, like the uncle, whatever. It's like, oh, look at Cisco 99.com, look at Nvidia. I'm like, yeah, but here's the difference. Was there 2 trillion of AI capex? Who's actually spending it? It's tech companies, 1.2 trillion of cash, and they generate 300 billion of cash a year. This isn't a startup funded late 90. as somebody went through it.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because even if we think about Optimus, that's going to need GPUs. And if we talk about a
Of course.
million bots, I mean, it seems like the demand for their product is insatiable, and it's not slowing if we're going to come up with GPT-7 one day.
But it's not. But that's and the point. It's people not understanding. Just like we talk about Palantir, it's not understanding Jensen, who he is
Yes.
individually, and the culture. See, people, they don't understand the culture of that company is they don't sit there and be like, oh, look where we are today, options, I could get a crazy car. They view things like we gotta continue to lead, continue to innovate. And that's the difference between them and call a pseudo government agency, Intel, right? Like
Right.
when you look at Intel, it's exactly the shame that happened to Intel that essentially became almost a beltway regulatory agency.
In the context of Nvidia's stock movement, we've obviously seen it go through a lot of ups and downs. I'm assuming a lot of that is noise to you because if you believe GPUs are inevitable and they have a monopoly, the stock could be further from
It's
the truth.
noise. And I hate, again, you say noise and then someone come out like, noise, you loved it at 140, now it's 130. I'm like, like, what do you want? Like, the point is, that's like the sports fan, like, watching a game, like, second quarter being like, oh, like, it's just like, this is a long game.
Yeah.
Like, my view is, it's a long game. The only time that I get negative, if something structurally changes in a name, then that's you have to like look at the thesis. But when you look NVIDIA, when the checks continue to be 15-1 demand and supply, and you look, we're only at 4% enterprise have gone down the AI path, and where numbers ultimately go. I'm not saying you don't have knee-jerk tariff worries, stocks down, people downgrade. But at the end of the day, my view is like this is a long game that we're playing here in terms of where. But it comes down to like, look, man, I could give you examples like Nasdaq's 5,000,
Yeah.
and you're telling people like, and remember this, dude. I made plenty of bad calls. I'm sure people will be like, oh, what about this call? But I remember like Nasdaq 5,000, like bull market, 2010, 2011. Oh, what about TARP? This Fed. 2012. Oh, Europe debt, Greek debt crisis. It's over. Oh, look at the Fed deficit. Dude, it's not sustainable. Here's the deal. I get it, but it's just like when we talk about with like Black Swan event, Tokyo when I was there for Tokyo Black Monday, just happens I was there. This is it. Currency trade done. It's like, has anything structurally changed? Yes or no? The money on the sidelines, 6-7 trillion. Many institutional investors are still very not well positioned. You're gonna
Yeah.
have volatility, but it's like when I look at things like yesterday and Powell, and like you go from 3 or 4 cuts to two. Here's the question: are we still cutting? Yes. Are we
Yes.
hiking? No.
No.
Are we in a cycle where like we're cutting 100 bips, 125 next like 12, 18, 20, 24 months? Yes. Soft landing? Yes. So AI revolution? Yeah. Trump coming in, deregulatory? Yeah. That's why I'm just not someone that sits there like tomorrow night, like, oh, is the Fed? Oh my, dude, the government's gonna shut down. Like, oh, I'm here. I'm like looking on Kalshi to see like what the betting odds are. It's just like that's the stuff. Dude, those are like the demon type things that mess with the thesis.
Right. AMD has sold off compared to Nvidia a lot this year. Do you have any thoughts on AMD right here?
I think that's like way oversold. Like it's a good example of like let's just say Google. I'm just giving an example like Alphabet like going like 150s, like worries about antitrust. Where that was a table pounder. Like you
Right.
go back to Meta 2 years ago, efficiency that because Lisa's. It's another example. Like you're betting on Lisa Su. You're betting that they're going to be a player in AI chips. None of that's being factored in. And I think that's one like when you look into next year, AMD's could be one of those names where you're like, what you look back and like, why was the stock so oversold? Because people feel like they're not going to be a benefit. It's not being factored in. But I could look,
Um,
but look, if you want to go back, like, just go back to like, I'm sitting there at WWDC. Apple's coming out with iPhone, and obviously 16 is going to come out, but they're talking about Apple Intelligence, sitting there in Cupertino. They do it. Stock trades down to like 190.
yep.
Everyone's like, bubble boy, this will age well, had it work, this, all of a sudden, a hater, this, downgrade. So the point is, like, it's another example of like, okay, now in December, you're looking at stock 250, like, and you haven't even had AI go to China, Apple Intelligence around the world. You haven't had developers build everything out. It's very easy in the moment to get caught up, right? Like in terms of like with like sentiment, stock, that. But look, it's just like I'm not saying like, dude, we're wrong plenty of times, but at least this has always been the way I've done it since late '90s, and that's just our style. And then people could take the opposite view, but that's sort of like how we do it.
Yeah, I think it's very important to just be consistent, and no one's gonna bat 100 when it comes to their stock picks. But having a consistent theme is, I think, why people respect and trust and want to keep listening to you.
Because too many, it's like something happens. Oh, now I'm Nick. That's that's something like I learned early on in my career on Wall Street, like going back to like 2002, 2003, that sometimes to like, oh no, downgrade, upgrade. And then you start to realize you're like, look, you like a name long term, stop focusing on this.
Yeah.
Focus on this.
I mean, to your credit, even on CrowdStrike's worst day in the past 5 years, you said nothing structurally changed. It's a bad mistake, but the world needs cybersecurity.
But that's it. But those are the point is like when stocks are up and to the right, you could put your sneakers on, do victory laps. I could care less about that. Where people need you, it's when things like it's like that July 19th day.
Yep.
People call, what do you, I'm like, dude, this like no one's pulling out CrowdStrike. This is a disaster. It's a black eye. They're gonna have to do mea culpa. They'll be dealing with lawsuits next 10 years, whatever. But those would be parking tickets. Like the point is like this story is not changing. But it just shows like you have opportunities in names when you have sometimes like in a social media where I'm like, that's it, it's over.
Yeah, no, there's definitely opportunities that can pop up. Dan, last segment, and then we'll get into some quick rapid fire, and then I'll get you out of here. Tariffs and the implication on Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia. What is your perspective on that?
My perspective is like, look, Musk is gonna be heavily involved there. And I mean, I was down in DC like, a few weeks ago. Like the point is like I think there's like we can go through some like negative headlines and scary stuff, China Hawks, Rubio, Navarro, and everything. The reality is like I think there's gonna be carve outs for Apple, carve outs for Tesla, carve outs for a lot of AI chips. China's gonna have to come to the table. And I think that's a game of high stakes poker.
Yep.
You just get through. Like the point is like when you play, if I'm playing poker to win at 3 a.m., like it's very easy to just like throw the cut. But the point is like you got to see where it ultimately goes, right? And I think that's like another good example. I think that the bark will be worse than the bite. It doesn't change the AI trade. And I think that's when it will create a lot of opportunities on headline risk as we go through it.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, headline comes out, stocks are down, like, people are bugging it. But I think that's one, like, I, at the end of the day, that will be like, it's going to be contained risk to those names.
Yeah, because Trump doesn't want Apple to be a company that suffers. They're in a great American company. So if you have a
And also,
conversation with Cook,
it's an understanding, and I've done, like, when I'm in DC, it's like, look, like, oh, you got to build it here. But if you want $3,500 iPhones, build them in New Jersey. If you want them done like $1,000 and made efficiently, you keep them in the China Taiwan supply chain. Now the reality is that like more and more, I think there's gonna be AI innovation hubs that are gonna happen in the U.S. But I think even like the Inflation Reduction Act, there's gonna be a lot of changes there. That's why Intel's on the wrong side of that, and who's on the right? Who's gonna be on the right side? You're seeing a lot more beltway initiatives in government toward Palantir,
Yeah.
toward Microsoft, toward Oracle, toward what I view as like Amazon and others. And that's why like there's a red carpet at Mar-a-Lago, because everyone understands like there the AI innovation is going to be happening in the US. First time in 30 years that US is ahead of China when it comes to tech.
Right. All right, some rapid fire for you, Dan. First off, Oklo, you initiated coverage today. What's the bull case for Oklo?
It's a second derivative plot, and then, like my focus on AI, it's like what's going to be the energy? How are you going to ultimately build out these data centers? I view Akko, like, look, it's pre-revenue company, but if I look at this is one like I believe as the energy plays out, this is kind of a second, third derivative play.
Any thoughts on SoundHound?
Look, it's been our favorite small cap, right? I mean, I just think it's one where very easily people could just focus on valuation and hate it. But if you understand the technology, you understand the algorithms, it continues to be one of our favorite names for 25. And I
Nvidia,
think that no,
Nvidia
it's
also
just
invested in them as well. Yeah.
but if you focus just on valuation, you miss these stories. I'm not saying stocks don't get ahead of themselves, come down. But my view of like SoundHound is like this is a name that continues to be like they're gonna be a long-term player in this market.
Is quantum computing real?
I think it's real. I think the scale is still an issue, but I think you're starting now to get to certain breakthroughs that this becomes a legitimate space that's going to be an investing landscape over the coming years. I think the question is going to be like how quickly this ramps.
Right.
And also I go back to like Con, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, whatever like favorite horror movie was, for tech, she's gone. M&A is going to accelerate. Quantum is going to be one of the key assets that big tech is focused on acquiring.
SpaceX just raised at 350 billion. Are there any space names like Rocket Lab, ASTS that you're interested in, or it's kind of just SpaceX?
I mean, I think SpaceX continues to be unique in that because, like, even I'm not like a fan of, like the leisure plays. There's Planet Lab, which I think is a good space play from like a data center. I know like they've missed some sort of quarters and stuff, but that's a longer term play. But I just continue to think on space. SpaceX is a little unique there.
Google, did they prove that they actually are innovating with their quantum announcement?
I think Google's a different company than it was 9 months ago, a year. I mean, I can tell you from like all the work that we do there, they are getting their act together when it comes to what's happening, like with Kurian on Google Cloud,
Yep.
GCP, Quantum. You're starting to see more innovation come out of there. It's exciting now what's happened at Google, and it also comes down to like Trump in the antitrust thing. I mean, like DOJ will continue to pursue it. I still view that like very, there'll be business model tweaks, not breakup. Some of that overhang is also starting to get removed.
In general, Dan, are you a believer in the crypto ecosystem?
I'm a believer in the crypto. I'm a believer that I think the bigger thing is that more companies are going to have to start investing in crypto as part of their treasury. And I know Microsoft, whatever, there's been noise there, but I think that's going to be the biggest focus. People talk about US government, but I think more companies, put this way, if you're a public board, you're looking at what sellers and MicroStrategy are doing.
Yeah, you
I
kind of
mean,
have to.
and
Yeah.
I've known Saylor personally. I knew him, back in the late 90s, 2000. Like, he's a visionary individual. And I think it's changed the game. Like, because more and more companies are going to view it as like disruptive tech. Bitcoin is going to continue to play a bigger role. And I think those that are not believers don't really understand the not just supply and demand, but I think even some of the use cases when it comes to blockchain and others.
Are you bullish on Meta and Microsoft in 2025?
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, Microsoft is probably one of the biggest names to own on large cap, just because even though that's name like maybe like underperformed a little
Right.
when it comes to enterprise, more and more on the workload side, AI, as more of these use cases happen, they're going to be a clear beneficiary. In my view, Meta, you haven't even started to factor in the advertising piece, what that actually could do from an AI perspective. And I think like, and Zuckerberg's a different individual than he was a few years ago. And I think it's
Right.
someone also that, is now playing nice in the sandbox.
Last two questions. What time is it at the party?
It's 10 p.m. Now, the point is like,
We went from
it,
9
it,
to 10. We're at least
no,
an hour
it started off at 9. You had some and my point is like, look, now the Velvet Ropes, Benioff comes like, oh, my name is in the list. You're in. Software, they're in. So now, McDermott's on the dance floor. Like you got Ellison, Safra. The point is like cybersecurity. Like they're waiting in line. They're like on the Velvet Ropes. Like I think they get in. And my whole point on the party, it's a great way to explain like where this party is. Now I'm not saying at one point like DJ doesn't stop playing music, glass in the dance floor, people hear sirens, think cops are coming to break up the party. You're gonna have some of those little moments, but party goes to 4 a.m. They look bears, they're looking at the party through this like on the outside, like they're sitting there like, looking at the party through like some little sort of like, little peek in. And they're like, party doesn't look that fun. The party, it doesn't
Party's
even. No,
overvalued.
oh, this party seems crazy. I'm gonna go up to my room and watch a C-SPAN. Now, how about this? At 6 a.m., let's meet up at the diner and see who had a better night, Bulls or the Bears. So my whole point is that like it's my view where we're talking about a multi-year tech bull market. And again, I'm not one that like goes to a party at 10 p.m. and be like, oh, what's gonna happen at 5 a.m.
Right.
You never know because sometimes there's after parties and other. So you said that's sort of my view.
Well, if it's a party, I think you're the star of the party for sure. You're the one letting everyone into the party. It's been just so exciting to watch your journey, Dan. And the last question for you is, what do you do for fun? Because you do a lot of media. You're on Bloomberg, you're on CNBC, you're doing my show, which my community deeply appreciates.
And
You're
it's
doing your
great
actual
great to
job.
come on. Yeah.
You're traveling. Like, do you read books for fun? Do you watch Netflix? How do
I
you
mean,
just
for
relax?
fun, I'm a sports. I mean, Penn State. Like I'm a diehard Penn State fan, right? So there's like, I mean, college football. I know you went to your first Army Navy game.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Like that is college football is our. It's more than just we're avid fans. I mean, so I think huge college football content, F1, spend time friends, family, and that's really it, man. It's like I like wine, but it's like it doesn't take a lot, right? I'm just like more focused on just like it's just balance and also tune out the noise, right?
Well, here's one question. I want to ask you this selfishly. This year, my career in media, I guess, has
Dude,
gone through.
you've blown up. Exactly. I mean, dude, it's
It,
like I mean, think about it. When I met you, you're wearing like an LL Bean shirt. Now you're dressed like a Beezus. So the point is like, look at your yeah, exactly.
well, it's experienced some hyper growth, and with that hyper growth comes a lot of anxiety. And I think a lot of people don't think about this because at the end of the day, you're a creator, you're an analyst, but you're also a creator in terms of the content you're putting out there. The anxiety of losing it, right?
Of
Because it
course.
from 0 to 1, you got to get it, you got to get the attention, you got to build the audience, but then you got to maintain it. You got to get the next stock pick right. You got to. Do you suffer a little bit from some of that anxiety of just like I got to keep doing these interviews, I got to keep getting myself out there?
See, I view it as I never viewed things like in that way. I was never worrying about what about if things go then I lose. I just kind of view it as like it's just like I just do my stuff day to day and I don't feel pressure where
Right.
it's like if you go on a bad streak or whatever. And I just kind of view the whole thing as sort of like it's also like being like humble, taking it all in and not being like afraid of like, oh, like what's gonna, because I feel like there's too many people that are always like afraid of like losing it. Instead, I just always view it as like, dude, it's like, it's just for me, it's kind of been like a step function to build it. You enjoy it along the way, and that's it. And like, I'm just not someone that like goes into things being like, oh, but if I go to the game, the traffic after is going to be crazy. We got to leave in like the middle of the fourth quarter, sprinting through the parking lot.
And I think part of you just enjoying it is your energy is what allows us to enjoy it, whether it's the analogies or the fashion. I think you're just out there having a blast. And
But
that's
it's
what
fun. But also, I enjoy it too, just because like whether there's like some 14-year-old being like, I've gotten the stocks the last few years watching you. That it's also like I also view it personally, like passing it on. It's why
Mhm.
I talk, like I speak at a lot of universities, a lot of high school, a lot of stuff like that, because I'm a believer in like it's creating the next like Amit Dan I like it's the because there's too many people like they get somewhere and then they're like it's mine, like I'm smart. I kind of like sort of passing it down.
You pay it forward. You pay
Yeah,
it
it's
forward.
like you pay it forward, and I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah. I love it. Dan Ives, thank you
Yo,
so
and
much.
thanks for having me, and thanks everyone listening. And it's look, it's fun, and it's just do also doing it all together too as a community. Whether
Yeah.
remember haters, lovers, happy holidays to everyone. But the point is like it's just good going through it together because this is such an exciting time that we just happen to be living in a once in a 40, 50 year revolution.
I agree. And it means the world that you even take the time to come speak to us.
Dude,
It
I
really
love
means
to
a lot.
like everything you and the community do. It's like it's seriously, it's like it's awesome. And I actually tell like a lot of times like institutional or if there's other people, I'm like, yo, dude, you got. They're like, oh, I don't do X. I'm like, "Dude, that's fine. That's like being like, oh, I don't eat pizza. Like, okay, enjoy it. But the point is like I feel like you get so much out of the community. People like found like people like yourselves, others. I think it's like you understand. I think a bit more what's going on.
Yeah. I love it. Merry Christmas. Happy
Hey,
holidays, Dan
yeah,
Ives.
see you guys.
Thank you. See you
Thank you
next
so
time.
much.
Bye
Bye.
bye.